Hello, and welcome to the Working Tools Masonic Podcast, where today we will be discussing the Circumpunct, or point within the circle.
Ladies and gentlemen, brethren all, welcome to the Working Tools Podcast, a casual conversation around Freemasonry. First, it's important to note that our opinions and thoughts are our own and do not reflect those of our Grand Lodge or respective craft or concordant bodies. Please connect with us and ask questions, either here on YouTube or on our Facebook page. We'd also appreciate a thumbs up and especially any comments on our videos.
I'm Appel, and I'm a Freemason here in the Grand Lodge of Washington. And we have with us this evening two of our usual hosts, David Colbeth, also from the Grand Lodge of Washington, and Stephen Chung of the Grand Lodge of British Columbia in the Yukon. And to this evening, we are gifted with having two guests, which we are grateful for having here today. We have Carsten Osterhold, who is a Mason up in British Columbia, and Zane McCune, who is here in Washington with us. Thanks for coming, guys.
Thanks for having me.
Glad to be here.
So this evening we'll be discussing, as I said earlier, the Circumpunct, or point within the circle, which is a really ancient symbol that can be found all over the world in with various meanings. And it's probably, I'm sure, within one of these podcasts, or even two or three, we'll not be able to cover all the symbolism behind it. But just sort of as a general starting point, where do you? It's become Christmas all over here. Where do you guys? What symbolism do you see within the point within the circle that comes to mind for you?
Well, I was reading about it, and Claudia has a diagram that talks about the two parallel lines he believes that represent, many times in Masonic information we have the circumpunct, or the point within a circle, and then there's the two parallel lines that adjoin with it, and he talks about the parallel lines being the summer solstices, and they align so well with also with St. John's Day, and 24th of June and then 27th of December, and they represent the highest and lowest points of the sun as they travel north and south. And so is one thing that I found.
If you want me to jump in there, basically when I look at it, there's kind of four aspects to it. There's the mathematical one, there's the astrological one, which you just had. There's the moral one, which we're given in Lodge, the lessons it's intended to inculcate. Then there's also the kind of ancient one, or the ancient symbol of various deities throughout the world. So it's as with most Masonic symbols, there's not just really one of them. There's several of them which have it, and they're all quite valid onto it. Probably the original one, why it was in the operative Masons, was the mathematical formula onto it. It's the way to make a true a right angle there. So it's so any master who's trying anyone's work, all you can do is you draw the circle, and you put a dot in the middle, and then you put a line that goes straight across and bisects that dot. And now you put a dot anywhere on the circumference of that circle, and you join up the lines, you're going to end up with a right angle triangle. Doesn't matter where you do it. It's a foolproof method of making a right angle or trying a right angle. And if you put the lines on either side, you can make a triangle either above or below the circle by having a line that just touches the circle, but the line will only extend towards the two parallel lines. And then you just draw a line down to the circle. So again, you're always going to end up with a true right angle triangle. So
I was reading about that was one of the things that they used, because they used metal tools for construction. I'm sorry, wooden tools and not metal, before metallurgy. Because they used wooden tools, they needed to have that ability to be able to make sure that they were true.
That's right, and it's even considered, like Anderson's in his constitutions in 1723. He lists that as like the great secret of a Mason. That was the master's job, is because he had to be able to have a way to be able to try and prove all his workman's work if it was actually right angles there. And just by a simple point within a circle, you could figure out right quickly whether or not something was a right angle or not.
So I probably should have started with this. I'm gonna try and share here. I've never done this before on this app, but we talk about the circumpunct, and is it sharing?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so there you go. Just in case anyone wasn't sure what we're talking about, the symbol we're talking about here is literally a point in the center of a circle, which Masonically frequently has two parallel lines, and sometimes the volume of sacred law across the top of it here.
That's
Just
correct,
to sort of make sure that it's clear to everybody. Sometimes, a lot of times in other applications, you see it without the parallel lines. You just see literally the point and the circle.
Yeah, there's lots of iterations of this. And you'll see it in Masonic literature with the Holy Saints John on either side as well. So, and I think to address your earlier question, like many symbols within Freemasonry, we've adopted and kind of co-opted along the way. It's certainly not an original Freemasonic symbol. You can tie the circumpunct, the point within a circle, back to quite a bit through antiquity.
There's also talk about it being I don't know if I can say this on air or not, but if you look at no, not sexual, I guess, but a phallic type symbol, right? I mean, it's a deity, but a deity based symbol. That the point is actually, if you look at it, if you imagine yourself looking down on it,
yeah,
the point is actually a pillar, if you will, or
it's a phallus.
Yeah, going up, and then the circle is the receptor of that. But it's also the picture of deity. That I forwarded a message to the guys about a Mason that had done a show, or a recording on a little project he had done, and he had said that his opinion was that the all-seeing eye was actually a version of the circumpunct, because that represents deity.
Well, the ancient Indians believed they had either kind of a pedestal or a chalice that would represent the female, and right in the middle they would have the phallus, sticking up to it, which was the male, and the two of them together is the great regenerative processes. So, and they even believe that after the flood, that was the only thing that was. I think there's some legend that was the only thing that was left over, and that kind of was on the surface of the water, and through that, all life resprang to it. And there's some who think that that's where it came into Egypt. I mean, in Egypt, you'll have ancient carvings with the point within a circle, and on both sides they have two serpents onto it, but straight, not wavy, and they're supposed to represent the Alpha and Omega, and that's a wisdom and power. That's the symbol of their ancient symbol of God, and so that thing is going back, how many ever thousands of years ago, carved in Egypt. So it's been around a really long time.
So, Carsten, it was interesting to get your perspective on, kind of the four illusions that the point within a circle represents to you. For me, I had a few more, and one of them relates to an alchemical illusion, and the point within a circle is an alchemical symbol for the sun,
Mm-hmm.
and interestingly, it's also a symbol for gold. So that's the symbol for gold. So as we talk about making men better, and finding, depending on how deep we want to go down the alchemical rabbit hole, we're finding those things within ourselves, and we're distilling them, and then we're using them to kind of reconstruct ourselves and make ourselves better. Okay, so there's kind of the 30-second connection to alchemy, and it's the idea of turning lead into gold is one which is controversial for most people, because they think that alchemists were literally trying to turn lead into gold. But if you think about it a little bit more from an allegorical perspective, that's what we're doing to ourselves. We're turning ourselves from lead into gold, and that gold is that point within a circle. That's the alchemical illustration of what that is. So we've got connections in there that probably don't talk about much in Lodge, just because alchemy doesn't come up that much. But that's certainly one of the first things I think of when I look at that symbol. That's just the point within a circle. We add the lines, the parallel lines, and the holy volume of sacred law on top, and decor it quite a bit more. But just taking it down to its base symbol.
Well, even to expand a little bit on what David said about the Saint John the Baptist and Saint John the Evangelist, they have some sort of moral significance, but I don't think there's anyone who actually believes that they were Masons or had any real connection. It's a definite allusion to the summer and the winter solstice, and the Baptist is always on the left and the other one's on the right. I've also I read an interesting paper that they felt that the point within the circle actually represents the equinoxes, because it's a dead center in between. So you have the solstices, which are the extremes, and if you take even a look at the sun's path throughout the year, it's the longest and the shortest days. They're the extremes, and right in dead center are the equinoxes, which is equally distant day and night in there, both the spring and fall equinoxes. So the whole thing could relate to the entire seasons of the year as almost as an astrological calendar type of thing.
Right, with the sun being in the middle, and for example, like the Earth orbiting around the sun. Yeah, I think that's our sort of our allusion to the circumambulation when we do something like that. So you bring up a good point about the Holy Saints John, and maybe not much academic argument that they were in a sense Masons. If you wanted to frame up an argument, you'd even ask yourself, we talk about them being the patron saints of Masons, but really neither one of them were. If we were going to talk about a patron saint, we probably would talk about St. Thomas, who's the patron saint of architecture and building. From purely that perspective, he would be a better quote unquote patron saint of Masonry than the Holy Saints Johns, St. John the Baptist, St. John the Evangelist. Have you dove into any of that kind of argument? It was like, why is there a connection to the Holy Saints John the way we have it set up now?
Well, interesting that you mentioned that. From documents that we have from the 1500s, many of them mention St. Thomas as their patron saint.
Right.
And I think it's some belief that as it became more Christianized, but that they became the saints. But I do think that, as you can see the little diagram there, that when they were trying to explain it there with what the line or the significance of the Holy Saints John, where it was kind of hidden in allegory about the summer and the winter solstice, I think that's how they started to become more involved with Masonry. But originally St. Thomas was kind of almost universally recognized. There was a few that had St. John, but more of them had St. Thomas as their patron saint.
So
what I've read, and maybe one of the other guys on the show here may have read, but the early Gnostics were the ones that had connection to St. John the Baptist, and I think what I've read is some connection from a Gnostic perspective. That's where we were introduced as kind of early Freemasonry was introduced to St. John the Baptist.
Do you know why St. Thomas isn't part of our ritual and our lore so much?
No, it just seemed to, as I said, in the 1500s, many of the writings of the very old ones, the old charges, they had St. Thomas in there. But by the time everything is getting a much greater structure in the early 1700s. That seems to have completely disappeared, and you only see the two Saints John. And I've never read a real satisfactory explanation why one was pushed out and the other ones were adopted. So
I wonder if there was any symbolism behind it. Maybe there just wasn't enough symbolism to connect it. It was just an allegory and didn't have anything to connect it.
Well, I think so. I think they wanted to introduce the kind of the hidden meaning of the thing with the Holy Saints John, and so they had to be included, and there wasn't really any kind of hidden meaning that you could include with Saint Thomas there. So so he left, and this Holy Saints John's came in.
So speaking of allegory and whatnot, there's several references. When you sat in lodge long enough, you hear references to the point within a circle several times. Like recently, we just had the Master Mason certificate presentation, and in there, there's the line, but the greatest of all you are taught in every degree, more particularly in the Master Mason degree, in the value in Freemasonry of the volume of sacred law, that point within a circle from which a Master Mason cannot err if he places his trust in the sacred oracles. So dissect that, because it doesn't go along with the St. John's, or it just what I mean. You guys who know more.
Well, as with every symbol, there's many meanings. The moral meaning, it's the same thing in the Entered Apprentice lecture, where it's given, where the whole explanation of St. John's and the volume across it, and it's the point represents an individual brother, the circle, the boundary line of his duty towards God and man, across which he's never to suffer his passions, prejudices, or interests to betray him on any occasion. So he's supposed to circumscribe and keep him within those due bounds. It's an admonition on how he should live his life, type of thing. So as with every symbol in Masonry, you have many different explanations. One is always a moral explanation for it.
I find it interesting that there's always many different explanations for, the same reference.
In your Canadian lodges, do you include an image of a point within a circle in your lodges?
Yeah, we have it on in the ancient work that we do. We have very similar to what you had up there. There's like a lecture, and we do. It's like a fairly large tracing board onto it, and on there is the point within the circle, the two lines, and you have St. John the Baptist on one side, St. John the Evangelist on the other side, and above the volume of sacred law. So,
and many of our lodges here in Washington have some kind of a picture or a diagram or something that they place in the east somewhere, kind of as a regular furniture almost of the lodge. And I just was reviewing the video I had sent out about that gentleman that was doing the lecture on the point within a circle. He alluded that while the degree talks about it being always displayed in lodge, it's not that it's actually, the ritual doesn't say displayed, it says represented. And I had to double check, and sure enough, it does say represented, because his argument or his analogy was that is actually displayed all the time, because the new, as you said, the initiate or the Mason is the point, and as he's in the lodge, then the two parallel lines are the Masons on the sides of the lodge, and the Holy Scriptures, the altar is the top, and the Holy Scriptures are on the altar, and so the circle is represented by the due bounds that the brothers of the lodge help him to maintain. And I thought it was an interesting idea. I hadn't thought about it being the lodge itself being the representation of the point within a circle, and not just an actual image somewhere hanging on the wall.
I've also, in regarding a lodge, I've heard it that the two lines are the brethren on both sides. The point is the volume of the sacred law in the middle, and the circle represents the candidate as he's going through his initiation, going around the middle of the lodge. So the circle kind of represents his past. So it's almost a depiction of a brother getting one of his degrees, type of thing, as he's going through one of his degrees. So it's I suppose you can say almost anything.
Yeah, I think, Zane, you alluded to that too, the circumambulation part.
Yeah. Well, interestingly, so I've got a book here that has been just a really interesting read for me, and so maybe to that point that Carsten just illustrated, And it kind of goes into saying it was a symbol found in part of the Gnostic initiation process. Getting to the center of the circle was the path of Gnosis. And so for them, and it goes on to say, this is why what Christ is said to have come before him were baptized with water and air, but he came to baptize with fire. Fire represented in the initiation into Gnosis, and in Freemasonry, it's related to our third degree. So I think, just like with a lot of symbols within our craft, we've taken something which has been used somewhere else, which has been used from something else, and we've kind of, like I say, kind of co-opted it and put our own meaning into it. And because of these things, this is why I'm actually somewhat in the camp of, when we say Freemasonry is ancient, it is for me. It may not be called Freemasonry that long ago, but we have things that harken back to that time that have kind of rolled over, and now we own these symbols, and these are our interpretations of these symbols, but they're certainly not ours and ours alone.
No, exactly. I mean, Freemasonry it's often been described as the inheritor of all the ancient mystery schools, and so it's not surprising that we've kind of co-opted all the various important symbols of all these other older mystery schools and incorporated them within Freemasonry.
So I think the question that you need to ask is, should we as Masons be, to what extent should we be exploring these other connections with these other mystery schools and the meanings that these symbols had to them, and do we find any value out of that? Or as Masons, should we kind of focus down the illustrations and meanings that have been assigned to them from a Masonic sense? It's just,
I think it's of course lots of personal, right? It depends on what the guy wants to do. If he's interested in learning about that, of course there may or may not be meanings because it's a human interpretation. Is there really a meaning behind it? Yeah, there might be, and you might be able to make some connections to it. But I think it's a personal level. How far does the guy want to go, and how distant of a connection you can make between things. I just was thinking we had a show not recently, it's been a while now, on cable tow. And, if we talk about the cable tow being the device that helps us to limit our abilities, if you will, so does the point within a circle to help us to limit our passions and do bounds. And so where do those two things connect, or are they different? Is it one a restrictor and one's a reminder? I don't know.
Yeah.
Carsten,
at the beginning, you alluded to 4 different aspects, and I wanted to see if we touched on all those. I know we talked about mathematical. I know we talked about moral. Where there were 2 more. Did we hit those?
Well, there was the astrological symbolism of it. It's whereas they symbolize the different solstices, and I think you already brought up the sun is the a small circle with a dot into it is an astrological symbol of the sun, and the other one was really where it was a symbol of many of these ancient deities, and we touch upon it a little bit in India and in Egypt, that it was a symbol of the deity, and we're kind of used to just the one god right now, but the ancients they never saw that. They always saw a combination of a male and female. Even Jupiter and Jove, they all had to have a male and female aspect to it, and so very much so that the circle has always been, it's kind of like a female representation, and the point, which is when you're looking at it as kind of like a 2-dimensional thing on there instead of 3-dimensional, it's actually kind of like a phallus into it. So it's a combination of basically the male and female regenerative processes type of thing, which is, for the ancients, was the most important thing. Otherwise you didn't have life. So that was always, so it seems that in many different cultures around that point within a circle of whatever deity they believed in was kind of like an overarching symbol of a deity type of thing. So you could, you can say it's a point, they representing individual brothers. You can also quite logically say that also represents God or deity, whatever you want to call it.
Well, as you talked about being the summer solstice and the St. John's days and the times of the year, summer, winter solstice, they represent the times of maybe beat this up, fecundity and harvest, right? The inception and then finishing of harvest, and so it's the same idea. It's the beginning and the end, essentially, of whether it's life or plants or whatever, and so it's definitely that connected. Do you think that the ancients had a male and a female because there were male and females, and so they just assumed that it had to be two because there were always male and female? I mean, we don't have, of course, have a third gender. Well, nowadays we might, but that's a whole other show. But in ancient times, it was men and women. There was two genders, and so do you think that there had to be two deities because there were two genders? Is that?
Yeah, I don't think they could really wrap their head around how just for example, a male deity could bring into creation anything by himself, right? They looked around and what they saw for every animal everything that's living, it needs a male and a female type of thing in order for it for new life to be created. So I think that was just a natural assumption for them that whatever creator deities there was, there had to be male and female properties to it. Otherwise, you couldn't have life. Life couldn't spring forth from just a male type of thing. So
I find it interesting. We were talking to tie together the creation and the astrological / astronomical. I've read a couple of times, although I don't feel like I know enough about it to speak intelligently about it, that the point within the circle can also represent the creation process of the universe itself, of the Word of God creating the universe, or if you will, astronomically, the Big Bang process, for that matter. Because there is space, and then there's something beyond space, and there's a border there somewhere of what is beyond what we have here, what was created in the Big Bang. Have you guys read anything about that, or is that just something that deposited itself in my brain from some random place?
No, I haven't seen anything about that. So
okay,
I haven't either. But I think with this symbol, I think there's lots of different connections and ways to explore it. So it wouldn't surprise me at all.
And also astronomically, one of the other things that always struck me was we talk about the circumambulation, and I mean it ties in my mind pretty clearly into the circumpunct as a symbol, but I think the candidate goes the wrong way around the altar. Okay? We got to fix that. I think the sun goes the other way, or the earth goes the other way around the sun. So we got to work on that one.
Yeah, the earth goes around the sun, but what I've read in many different things is when the candidate goes around, he's not representing the earth; he's representing the sun. And when you look at the sun from where we are in the northern hemisphere, the sun that's the path that the sun would make. And so the candidate isn't actually the earth going around the sun. He's mirroring the how he believes the sun moves around there. So that's
the observed trajectory of the sun from the point of the earth.
From the earth. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, so in most of the books that I've read, that they say that's why why everything always goes clockwise around there, is because you're mirroring the movement of the sun.
Freemasons aren't the only organization to have that type of process for initiation. That's not unique to Freemasonry either.
No, it seems to be the natural thing that almost it's the harmonic way is to go clockwise and not counterclockwise, but I'm not besides mirroring the sun, I'm not entirely sure why.
So what I've read in this, and I'm not sure I could cite this right now off the top of my head, but was that the ceremony is related to a rite of purification, and it's in connection to the Latin word lustrare, which came to signify both to purify. something, which is what its original meaning was, and also to walk around anything. These two were interconnected so much that walking around something and being purified by it were connected. That's, like I said, I don't think I could cite that right now, but that's some of the stuff I've read as well. Which would make sense in Lodge. One of the very first things that we do to the candidate is to circumambulate him, or we purify him before he can take part of the actual initiation. So that's our step.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
So I notice all the hosts have their screens muted, and our two guests are talking up a storm. And luckily, we've got you because you are fonts of information here. Oh, now they all unmute themselves. I see.
We're coming to defend ourselves.
We were just absorbing all that knowledge that our guests had to share, and didn't want to interrupt them.
Exactly. I was going to see if I could find the diagram that Carsten was talking about in the very beginning. It's nice to be able to explain it, but it's also nice to be able to see it. And we're fortunate with video; we can do that on the podcast. People can't see what we're doing here all the time, but it would be fun to, Matt, if you have the ability to find that diagram and share it. You did such a good job sharing. The last show that you'll see, I tried to do a screen share, and it really messed up the video orientation, and so we're going to be a little miniature pictures, or with Zane on there. We were talking about the chamber reflection. Thank you, chamber reflection. And so the images turned out good, but then when it comes back from my screen sharing, it shows a little tiny picture of us
on my side, sideways.
So I don't know if
we are running out of time in our show for today. So I'd like to thank Carsten Osterhold and Zane McCune for joining us here on the Working Tools Masonic podcast of our conversation about the point within the circle. So thank you guys, and we look forward to hearing from both of you again soon.
Thank you.
It's my pleasure.